When tragedy strikes, when our lives are ripped apart by cruel circumstance or some unseen variable, our minds begin a complex process of integration. When our mind is not capable of that integration immediately, it will instead begin a process of protection, of drip feeding the unsavory information to us indirectly through dreams, through rumination, through intellectualization. We often have an inability to accept the what of the situation at face value. We cannot, and arguably should not, rest at acknowledging that the plane has crashed. We ask not only what occurred, but why did the plane crash? When did the plane crash? How did the plane crash? Where was the point of failure? Was this an error of the pilot, of the mechanics, of the builders? Or was it truly an unavoidable freak accident? We began to try developing patterns, identifying signs and signals, anything that might alert us to an issue that could have been caught before the plane crashed. We develop emergency plans and procedures, fail safes and redundancies, all in an effort to try to avoid the next plane crash. None of this is wrong. We should absolutely try to learn from our mistakes. We should try to use the past to inform our future. If something can be made smarter and safer, why would we not do that? So we seek endless answers and endless data, hoping to avoid the next inevitable plane crash. But so often, I think we forget that no matter how much we analyze it, no matter how much data we gather or how many simulations we create, this plane is still in pieces, scattered across the ground. In the first episode of this podcast, I explained that when bad things happen in my life, especially when it comes to relationships or friendships, I tend to fall into a role that feels kind of like a flight crash investigator. I also say that because of what I now recognize to be a lack of accountability from the people around me, I often feel as though I am entirely alone in this process. That I am trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces reside in someone else's hands, and usually they're not willing to give them up. My goal with this arc or season of the podcast was to walk people through that investigation. This is the experience that I've been living through, and it felt like a great starting point considering I wanted people to see the mess, to see the imperfection. But so much has happened in such a relatively small period of time, and my little ADHD brain works so fast that it's hard for me to even keep up most of the time, that providing every little detail or walking you through each different moment or phase just seemed really impossible. Not to mention that same ADHD brain loves repeating itself, loves looping information. That's part of my integration process. But making podcast episodes that just repeat themselves is probably not great business. So I chose instead to try intellectualizing the concepts behind the story, to walk you, the listener, through the broader ideas and patterns that began appearing as I progressed through this grieving period. We talked about the ideas of lose-lose situations, of how shame shapes us, affecting both the parts of us we hide and the parts of us we show. We talked about anger, how it is a deeply misunderstood and honestly really feared emotion, I think, but how it can give us a sign of the things that are harming us and give us a lot of information. These are all concepts that I personally have grappled with for the past 6 months of my life. And I tried to present them in a way that wasn't necessarily spilling every drop of tea and wasn't designed to be a bully or absolve myself of accountability or anything like that, but just as a relatable experience that if you're going through a similar thing and your brain works a similar way, you might hear those episodes and think, oh, that's what that is. I relate to that. Anyway, I've spent an immense, probably an unhealthy amount of energy and time over the past 6 months desperately trying to make sense of a situation that just didn't make sense to me. A situation that caught me basically entirely off guard, literally ripped my existence down to the foundation, destroying my sense of home, my sense of self, and honestly, at times, my sense of sanity. I don't want to make it sound dramatic, but to say that this situation wasn't jarring enough to force me to basically reevaluate every single facet of my life, down to my individual friendships and my day-to-day activities, would be underselling the extreme challenges it has presented me with and just how far I've pushed myself to get to where I am now. Those challenges are things like I lost 40 pounds in the first month after this breakup because I could only eat once every 2 to 3 days. And if I did eat, it was something like a protein bar while I was at work. I slept maybe an hour a night if I was lucky enough to actually sleep. And even now, 6 months out, my sleep schedule is still not great. My nervous system was so rattled at one point that I had to just take my Apple Watch off for like a month straight because it buzzing would set my nervous system on fire and almost like give me anxiety attacks. I've cried and screamed more in the past 6 months than probably the rest of my life combined. And that might be counting when I was a literal baby, like a toddler. I've written a short book worth of letters, and I've talked to my friends for hours upon hours on end until I literally could not talk anymore. This has been the single most painful experience of my entire life, and I genuinely struggle to imagine that any other experience will ever come to match it. But even while in the trenches of these challenges, I have worked exhaustively to change myself and my habits. I started going to the gym and eating healthier, at least trying to cook more at home and really watch what I'm taking in. And I'm proud to say that I've continued to do those things. Imperfectly, but I continue to do those things. I started therapy, and 6 months later, I still attend every 2 to 3 weeks or so. My therapist, I feel like, kind of thinks I don't need therapy, but I still go, just in case. I created this podcast and I've actually followed it through, which is huge for me because I usually don't follow through on my ideas, especially really difficult, vulnerable ones. I've recovered from my knee surgery better than my doctors expected me to, with my range of motion and strength both really exceeding their best outcomes, which is pretty rad. If my role is a flight crash investigator, then I have played that role amicably and faithfully. I have spared absolutely no tool or channel in an obsessive search for clarity and understanding of myself, of my failed relationship, even with my ex-partner, at least to the extent to which you can gain clarity from a human ghost. And I feel as though I've gained about as much understanding of the situation as I possibly can with the puzzle pieces I'm still missing. Which leads us to this episode. The one where I tell you that absolutely none of it really fucking matters. At least, not in the way one might hope it does. I came up with the idea for the swell and the collapse about 2 months ago. So, yes, unfortunately, I am speaking from a past version of myself, which I hate because I wanted this to be a podcast about being in the thick of it, but it still feels fresh enough that even writing this episode is kind of making my skin crawl a little bit. And I didn't want to leave the arc without its ending. The idea was to open these episodes with the idea of entering the investigation and then ending it with the realization that like the investigation didn't really matter a whole lot. And that's where we're at now. 2 months ago when I conceptualized this whole idea, it was because I had hit a wall. My job had ended, so I had lost yet another anchor point in my life. The holidays were a complicated and irritating mess. I wasn't in so much pain anymore that my nervous system was on fire, but I still wasn't at peace enough to sleep well or really feel happy existing. And one night, it just hit me. All of it. Like a rolling wave pushing me underneath the surface of the water that I'd been treading for months. Just this crushing reality that it didn't fucking matter why it happened. It didn't matter why I'd been lied to, why my trust had been broken over and over again, why I'd spent years feeling tolerated rather than wanted. It didn't matter why my life was burned down essentially overnight. And it didn't matter why the person who'd been telling me they loved me for almost 6 years, the person who swore up and down that they didn't want to lose me, had seemingly changed their mind overnight and just continued pushing me away until she became a ghost in a story that I hadn't even caught up to yet. It just didn't matter. All of a sudden, everything I'd done, everything I'd learned just washed away. My motivation gone, my sociability gone. I didn't give a shit about video games or my friends or cooking or trips to see friends. I didn't care about the family drama plaguing the walls I've been forced to call home. I didn't care about all the stupid shit that I'd been telling myself about a better future or a glow up. The wayward faith in a light at the end of the tunnel stopped relieving the smothering darkness of the tunnel itself. Life just became grief. Not anger, not shame, not something I could neatly intellectualize and put into a 20-minute podcast episode. Just this all-encompassing grief of knowing that someone you saw the rest of your life with woke up one morning and said, nope, no thanks. The grief of knowing they don't want you, the grief of wondering if they ever did, the grief of knowing you stayed in a situation you knew wasn't going well, the grief of wondering which parts of you are even real and which parts are some kind of fucked up survival mechanism. The grief of fearing for your now entirely unknown future. The grief of your belief in repair and reconciliation between two people being shaken to its core. The grief of wondering how many other lies were there. The grief of wondering if this is gonna leave you fucked up for the rest of your life. It feels like fucking drowning. Like water rushing into your lungs. And in that moment, your will to become better, to create meaning, it just becomes a will to survive. A will to make it from sunup to sundown. It's the moment when something catastrophic becomes reality. It takes our bodies some time to catch up sometimes. So even if you know in your mind that nothing is ever going to be the same for you, your body isn't quite ready to feel it. And you don't get to choose when it's ready. It just happens. And in that moment of collapse, you find that nothing you've done, nothing you've learned, nothing you've hoped for or cursed, none of it fucking matters. Because you are still underneath the surface. Your lungs are still filling with water. And that plane is still in pieces, scattered across the ground.